At my son's company launch event in San Francisco, he stood on a stage in front of 200 investors and journalists and thanked every single person who helped him build his startup, his uncle, his co-founders, his professors, his early mentors, and never once said my name. So I picked up my jacket from the chair beside me, walked out through the side exit while the applause was still going, and drove to my hotel alone. And when his uncle's funding collapsed 4 months later and my son called asking for the $87,000 I'd spent 18 years building for him, he found out it was already gone. Before we get into this, please subscribe to Arcane Vengeance and drop a comment telling me what time it is, where you are right now. $87,000. I know what that number looks like to different people. To my brother Craig, it was what he spent on a single weekend in Napa last spring. To me, it was 18 years of double shifts, skipped vacations, driving a truck with 190,000 miles on it, and eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch so I could move $400 every single month into a savings account. I opened the week my son was born. I was sitting in my kitchen in Dayton, Ohio, staring at my bank statement on the laptop screen, the cursor hovering over an account that now showed a zero balance. The kitchen still had the same yellow curtains my wife had hung when we moved in. I hadn't replaced them. I don't know why. Maybe because she'd picked them out herself and they were the last thing in the house that still felt like her decision. My wife, my son's mother, her name was Carol. She died 11 years ago from a brain aneurysm on a Tuesday afternoon in March when my son was 16 years old. She was 41. She'd been standing in the grocery store checkout line and simply collapsed. The paramedics said she was gone before she hit the floor. The night the hospital called me at the station, I sat in the locker room for an hour before I could make my legs move. I want you to understand who Carol was, because this whole story is really about her as much as it's about me and my son. Carol grew up poor in eastern Kentucky, the daughter of a coal miner who died of black lung disease when she was 12. She worked her way through community college, transferred to Ohio State, met me at a backyard cookout a mutual friend threw in Columbus, and never stopped working towards something better for our family from the day we got married. She used to say that the most important thing a parent could do was give their child a longer runway than they had. She meant education, opportunity, a soft landing if things went wrong early in life. She believed in that idea with everything she had. When our son Tyler was born, Carol and I sat in the hospital room after the nurses had taken him for his first bath, and she looked at me and said, "We start saving tomorrow, Daniel. Not next month. Tomorrow." We opened the account 2 days later, after I went back to work at Station 12, $400 a month. Carol's idea, Carol's discipline, Carol's runway. After she died, I kept putting the money in. Some months it was hard. Firefighter salary in Dayton doesn't make anyone rich, and once Carol's income was gone, the math got tight in ways I hadn't anticipated. There were months I borrowed from the account and paid it back the following payday. There were 2 winters where the furnace needed work, and the account sat flat for 60 days. But I always brought it back to current, because stopping felt like admitting I couldn't keep the promise we'd made together. Tyler was a good kid after Carol died. A quiet, serious kid who channeled his grief into studying the way some kids channel it into trouble. He'd been interested in computers since middle school, the kind of kid who built his own PC from scratch at 15 and was writing basic applications by the time he graduated high school. He got into the computer science program at Ohio State on a partial scholarship. I covered the rest through that savings account, through student loans we took out together, through every extra shift I could pick up. 4 years at Ohio State. He graduated at 22 with a degree in computer science and a minor in business. He had a job offer from a mid-sized software company in Columbus before he even walked across the stage. I sat in the 3rd row in the arena and cried like an idiot when they called his name, and I didn't care who saw it. What happened next took about 2 years to fully unfold, but the seed of it was planted the summer before his senior year when my brother Craig came back into our lives. Craig is 9 years younger than me. We grew up in the same house in Dayton, but we've lived very different lives. Craig left Ohio at 21 and went west, spent years grinding through tech startups in the 90s and early 2000s, made significant money in 2 acquisitions, and by the time he was in his 40s, He was operating as an angel investor out of a house in Sausalito, with a view of the bay that probably costs more per square foot than my entire neighborhood. We were never close as adults. Different worlds, different rhythms. We talked on holidays, sometimes not even then. After Carol died, he sent flowers and a card that said, "Call me if you need anything," and I appreciated it. But I never called, and he never followed up. Then Tyler went to a tech conference in San Francisco the summer before senior year, and Craig happened to be there, and they met for the first time as two adults rather than as uncle and nephew. Craig saw Tyler's senior capstone project, a workflow automation tool Tyler had been building for 2 years, and called me the following Monday. "Daniel, your kid is sharp," Craig said. "I mean genuinely sharp. That project he showed me has real commercial potential. I want to talk to him about it properly." I was glad. I thought it was good that Tyler had an uncle who saw his talent and wanted to encourage him. I thought it was good that Craig was paying attention. I thought a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. Not about Craig's intentions exactly, but about what his attention would cost Tyler in ways neither of them understood yet. Craig started mentoring Tyler through senior year. Video calls twice a week. He introduced him to people in the Bay Area investment community. He helped him reshape the workflow tool into a real pitch deck. When Tyler graduated and took that Columbus job, Craig called him within a week. "Tyler, you're too good for that job. That company will cap your ceiling inside 2 years. If you're serious about building something, now is the time." Tyler called me that weekend. "Dad, Craig thinks I should turn down the Columbus offer. He wants to help me launch the company properly. He says he can pull together seed funding." I listened. I chose my words carefully. "Son, that's a big decision. What do you want to do?" What I wanted to say was, take the job. Build your savings. Stay grounded. Your mother and I didn't grow up with safety nets, and I know what it feels like when the floor drops out. But he was 22 years old, and his uncle was telling him he was exceptional, and I understood that there is a point in a young man's life where the voice of caution from his father sounds less like wisdom and more like fear. Tyler moved to San Francisco 6 months after graduation. Craig helped him find 2 co-founders through his network. Craig led the seed round himself, $600,000, in exchange for a meaningful equity stake. The startup was called FlowPath, workflow automation for mid-sized companies, the kind of software that was genuinely useful and occupied a real niche. Tyler was the technical founder and CEO. For the first 2 years, it was all I could do to stay in contact. He was consumed. The calls got shorter, then less frequent. When I visited San Francisco the first time, Tyler put me up in a hotel in the financial district and took me to dinner at a restaurant where I ordered something I couldn't pronounce and didn't finish. Craig joined us. He was warm, enthusiastic, full of stories about deals and people and opportunities. He called Tyler the real thing 3 times during dinner. Tyler glowed. On the drive back to my hotel, I realized I had barely spoken for 2 hours. The second visit, 8 months later, Tyler had a conflict with an investor meeting that ran long. We rescheduled dinner twice and ended up at a burrito place near his apartment at 9:30 at night, eating standing up. He was distracted, checking his phone, talking about runway and burn rate and a Series A they were planning. He was 24 years old and sounded 40. "Dad, Craig has set up a meeting with one of the top VCs in the Valley next month. If we close this round, we're looking at a valuation that'll make the seed numbers look like a rounding error." "That's exciting, son. Are you sleeping enough?" He laughed like I'd said something slightly embarrassing. By the 3rd year, my calls were going to voicemail more often than not. He'd text back hours later, just in a sprint, "Talk soon." Or, "Crazy week, I'll call Sunday." Sunday would come and go. The Sunday calls started happening every 3 weeks, then monthly. I stopped mentioning it directly because every time I did, the conversation took on a fragile quality that made me feel like I was the problem. Craig, I gathered, was a constant presence. Craig was at every major pitch. Craig was at the Series A closing dinner. Craig was photographed at the launch party for FlowPath's enterprise product, standing next to Tyler in every shot. Tyler's Instagram, which I checked sometimes the way you probe a sore tooth with your tongue knowing it's going to hurt, was full of Craig at conferences, Craig at dinners, Craig at the Giants game in his club seats. There was a photo of them on Craig's sailboat in the bay on Tyler's 26th birthday. I found out it was his birthday from the caption. I'd sent him a card to his San Francisco address. I don't know if it arrived. He didn't mention it. The invitation to the Flowpath official launch event came by email 5 weeks before the date. The company had secured a Series B, restructured its leadership, and was doing a formal public launch at a venue in Soma. Tyler had sent the invite himself, which I was grateful for. The email said, "Dad, this would mean a lot to me. There's a seat reserved for you in the second row." Second row. My son was launching a company, and I had a seat in the second row. I bought a plane ticket the same day. I got the same Navy suit I'd worn to Carol's funeral, dry cleaned and pressed. I booked 3 nights at an airport hotel because the Soma hotels were quoting me prices that would have covered a month of groceries. I didn't mind. I was going to watch my son launch something he'd built. Whatever the seat location, whatever the hotel, that was enough. The venue was a converted industrial space. High ceilings, exposed beams, the kind of place that probably rented for $15,000 a day. When I arrived, there were people everywhere, dressed in the particular San Francisco way that is simultaneously very expensive and very casual. I found my seat, second row center, which was actually a good seat. The chairs around me filled with people who seemed to know each other and spoke in the shorthand of an industry I only partially understood. I looked around for Craig and found him quickly, not because he stood out, but because he was standing with Tyler near the stage. Tyler was in a slim-cut dark suit I'd never seen before, his hair cut close on the sides. He looked older than 27. He looked, if I'm being honest, like Craig would have looked at that age. He had adopted something of Craig's posture, that particular quality of confidence that comes from never having doubted whether you belonged in a room. I caught Tyler's eye from across the space. He waved, one hand, quick, turned back to Craig and the 2 men they were talking to. The event started on time. A company video played. Then the co-founders spoke briefly. Then Tyler walked to the center of the stage and the room went quiet. I want to be accurate here. Tyler gave a genuinely good speech. He spoke about the problem Flowpath was solving, about the market opportunity, about the team he'd built. He spoke clearly, without notes, with the kind of ease that I recognized from when he was a teenager explaining some piece of technology to me at the kitchen table, patient and precise, and obviously in love with the subject. And then he shifted to the personal. None of this would exist without the people who believed in me before the evidence was there to justify that belief. He paused. My co-founders, who took a bet on an idea and a vision and nothing else. The team at Flowpath, who gave up safer paths to build something that matters. And I have to say this directly, my uncle Craig Walsh, who saw what this could be before I saw it myself. Craig, you didn't just invest capital. You invested time, attention, and a standard of excellence that fundamentally changed how I think. You taught me what it means to operate at the highest level. I'm standing here tonight because you refused to let me settle. This company exists because of you. The room applauded. Craig, seated in the front row, nodded with the practiced humility of a man who had heard himself praised many times. Tyler continued for another 2 minutes, wrapping up the speech. He never said my name. Not a passing reference. Not a brief acknowledgement. Not even the generic thanks to family that most people include as a formality. Nothing. I sat in my second row chair and waited until the end of the speech, in case he had saved something for the closing line. He hadn't. I picked up my jacket. The applause was still happening. I moved along my row quietly, excusing myself past seated guests, making my way to the side of the room and out through an emergency exit that opened into an alley. The door closed behind me with a heavy click. It was a cool San Francisco evening, and I stood there for a moment in the alley, listening to the muffled sounds of the event continuing inside. I walked to my rental car, drove to the airport hotel, went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the wall for a while. My phone buzzed. A text from Tyler. "Dad, where are you? The reception is starting." I typed back. "Wasn't feeling well. Long flight. Very proud of you, son." Tonight was impressive. 3 dots appeared. Then, "You left? The dinner is at Prospect. Craig reserved the whole back room. There are investors there you should meet. Investors I should meet." I was a 62-year-old retired firefighter from Dayton, Ohio. I had no idea what I would say to his investors. I had no idea what my presence at that dinner would add to anything, except a reminder to everyone present that the CEO of Flowpath came from ordinary stock and had an ordinary father who did not belong in the back room of a restaurant in Soma. I wrote back, "Give my apologies. Get some sleep tonight, son. Big day." I turned the phone over and stared at the ceiling. I thought about Carol. I thought about the grocery store checkout line, the way she never made it home with the milk she'd gone to buy. I thought about the night I told Tyler, sitting in his bedroom with his baseball trophies on the shelf and a poster of some video game on the wall, that his mother was gone and she wasn't coming back. The sound he made was not crying exactly. It was something underneath crying, something that came before it. I held him for a long time. I told him I was going to be there every single day, that it was just the two of us now, and that we were going to be okay. I had been there every single day. I thought about the 18 years of $400 monthly deposits, the account sitting now at $87,000 that Tyler had never once asked about directly, had mentioned only twice in passing. Once at Thanksgiving 4 years ago when he said the fund would be useful eventually, and once on the phone last year when I'd mentioned it, and he'd said, casually, almost offhandedly, that he appreciated it, but Flowpath's current valuation meant money wasn't exactly the concern it once was. My son's startup had a paper valuation of $12 million based on the Series B terms. I understood why $87,000 looked different from that vantage point. I understood the math. I just hadn't understood that the math would also reshape how he saw me from the person who kept the lights on to a footnote in a story someone else was now writing for him. That night in the hotel room, I opened my laptop and logged into the savings account. $87,340. I sat with it for a long time. Then I opened another tab and searched for the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. It was an organization I'd known about for years that supported the families of firefighters killed in the line of duty. Families like the ones I'd seen in my years at Station 12, a wife and 2 kids at the door, when someone had to come tell them something no one should ever have to hear. The foundation ran scholarship programs for the children of fallen firefighters, kids trying to get to college on the same runway that Carol and I had believed in, kids without the parent who was supposed to help them build it. I stared at the donation page for a long time. Then I set up the withdrawal from the savings account, authorized the transfer, and designated it as a scholarship endowment. I named it the Carol Ann Mercer Memorial Scholarship, after my wife, using her maiden name, the name she'd had when she was a coal miner's daughter in eastern Kentucky, who decided she was going to build something different. The account showed 0. I closed the laptop and slept better than I had in months. The flight home to Dayton left at 7 in the morning. I was back in my kitchen by mid-afternoon, the yellow curtains letting in the October light, and I made coffee and sat at the table and felt something I hadn't felt in a while that I couldn't immediately name. It took me a few minutes to recognize it as peace. My phone had accumulated messages. Tyler had texted twice more the previous night, both short. "Hope you're feeling better. Call me tomorrow." Then, more urgently, the next morning, "Dad, I need to talk to you. Can you call when you land?" I called when I got home. "Dad." His voice had a different texture, controlled but with something under it. "Hey, son, I heard you left the event. Are you actually sick? Or was this about the speech?" I paused. "Both," I said. "That's not quite honest. The drive was long, Dad." He exhaled. "If this is about the thank yous, I'm sorry you felt left out, but the speech was focused on the business side, the investors and partners. It wasn't the right context for personal acknowledgments." "I hear you," I said. I didn't argue with him, not because I didn't have things to say, but because I'd spent the night in the hotel room saying them to myself, and I no longer needed to say them to him. Not yet. He moved on. "Dad, I actually need to talk to you about something serious. Craig is pulling back from Flowpath." I sat down in the kitchen chair. "What does that mean exactly?" The Series B had conditions built into the term sheet performance milestones we were supposed to hit by Q3. We missed 2 of them. Craig's fund has a fiduciary obligation to their LPs, and he's exercising a provision that allows them to reduce their position. He's cutting his stake by 60% and stepping back from the board. I absorbed this. What does that do to the company? It's not ideal. We're looking at a restructuring. Some positions on the team are going to be affected, and my compensation as CEO is being renegotiated as part of it. I've essentially been working on deferred salary for the last 8 months because we were reinvesting everything, and the new structure means that deferred amount is being written off. He'd been working for 8 months without full pay. I hadn't known that. How much are we talking about? I asked. Total? Between the deferred comp and the equity dilution from the restructuring? I'm probably looking at a net loss of about $60,000 from what I was expecting to have. Plus, I've got a lease in San Francisco and some personal credit lines I extended to cover operating expenses during the crunch. He paused. Dad, I know about the savings account, the college fund you've been adding to all these years. I know you mentioned it's grown to a decent amount. I was wondering if we could talk about whether any portion of that might be available as a bridge loan, just to stabilize things while the restructuring completes. Bridge loan, he was calling it a bridge loan. A loan from his father's savings that had been built for him since birth was now a financial instrument with a label on it to make the request feel transactional rather than what it actually was. I took a slow breath. Son, I said, I need to tell you something. I closed that account. He was quiet for a moment. What do you mean? I made a donation, the full balance. I named it the Carol Ann Mercer Memorial Scholarship with the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. It's funding college for kids who lost a parent in the line of duty. The silence on the line stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Dad. His voice was quiet now. That quality underneath the controlled surface more audible. You donated $87,000. Yes. When? 2 nights ago. After the launch event. Another silence. Was this because of the speech? I thought carefully before answering. Son, the account was always yours. I built it for you, but it was mine to do with as I wanted, and I decided I wanted it to go to kids who have exactly what you had at 16, a parent who isn't there anymore, and a long road ahead anyway. I thought your mother would have liked that. I thought it was the right thing to do with the money. I heard his breathing change. I have student debt, Dad. I have a lease I can barely cover right now. I've been under enormous pressure, and I genuinely thought that fund was there if things got bad. I know you did, I said. That was probably a fair assumption to make. I'm sorry I didn't give you more warning. He made a sound I couldn't quite read. Frustration, disbelief, maybe something closer to grief that he wasn't ready to identify yet. I need to figure out what I'm doing here, he said finally. The restructuring means my role at Flowpath might be changing significantly. Craig and I, it's complicated now. Professionally and just everything. I imagine it is, I said. He hadn't asked about me, I noticed. Not about how I'd gotten home. Not about whether I was actually feeling unwell. The conversation had moved directly from the launch event to the money and hadn't widened beyond that. I noted it and let it go. After we hung up, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. It was a cool October afternoon, leaves coming down from the maples along the street, that particular Midwestern autumn smell of earth and smoke and the season ending. I walked for about an hour. I thought about Craig. I didn't have anger toward him specifically. He'd seen something real in Tyler. My son's talent was genuine, and Craig had recognized it. But there's a certain kind of man who invests in people the way he invests in companies, with enthusiasm and clarity when the returns look strong, and with clean, efficient withdrawal when the numbers change. Craig had never been the kind of person who shows up for the difficult part. He left Ohio at 21 and never looked back. When Carol died, he sent flowers. He hadn't come to the funeral. Tyler had spent 5 years learning to see the world through Craig's lens, and what I think he'd slowly come to believe was that Craig's way of measuring things was the accurate way. That success was the standard against which all contributions should be measured. That a man who handed you a network and a check was investing more meaningfully than a man who drove you to hockey practice in a beat-up truck and sat in the cold of a rink at 5 a.m. reading a paperback while you ran. Drills. I don't say that with bitterness. I'm saying it because I think it was an honest mistake for a young man to make, and because I had watched it happen gradually enough that I hadn't known where exactly I could have interrupted it. The weeks that followed were quiet on my end. Tyler texted occasionally short updates, logistical things. The restructuring at Flowpath had concluded, and his role had shifted from CEO to a technical advisory position, which was a significant reduction in both compensation and authority. He was no longer running the company he'd founded. Two of his co-founders had stayed, one had left. The new CEO was an operator Craig's fund had brought in to stabilize the business. Craig had not reached out to Tyler personally since the restructuring announcement. Not a call, not a text. Tyler mentioned it once, briefly, in a way that suggested he didn't want to dwell on it. Craig's got a lot of moving pieces, he said. I get it. I didn't say what I was thinking. My son was 27 years old, sleeping in an expensive San Francisco apartment he was now struggling to afford, watching the company he'd built get handed to someone else, and the man who'd been his mentor and model for 5 years was not returning his texts. I did not feel satisfaction at any of this. I felt exactly what any father would feel, which was the particular helplessness of watching your child learn something hard and knowing that the only thing you can do is stay present and let the learning happen at its own pace. He called on a Sunday evening in November, 6 weeks after the launch event. Actually called, not texted. Hey, Dad. Hey, son. How are you holding up? He paused longer than normal. Honestly, I'm not great. Tell me. And he did, for the first time in a long time, just talk to me without an agenda. He told me about the restructuring and how it had felt to hand over the CEO role, how he'd tried to make peace with it and found that he couldn't yet. He told me about the co-founder who'd left and taken a chunk of institutional knowledge with him. He told me he'd started looking at positions in Columbus and Cincinnati, that San Francisco was financially untenable now, and that the idea of going back felt both like defeat and also like maybe the most honest thing he could do. Then he said, I looked up the scholarship, Dad. The Carol Ann Mercer one. I let him keep talking. The foundation sent out an announcement. A girl from somewhere in rural Georgia, first in her family to go to college. Her father died responding to a wildfire when she was 14. She got the first award, full tuition at Georgia Tech, engineering. He was quiet for a moment. Mom would have liked that, he said. Yes, she would have, I said. Another pause. I've been thinking about the launch night, about the speech, and I keep trying to defend it to myself, the framing, the audience, the focus on business partners, and I can't actually make it hold together because you were there. You flew out there. You sat in that room. And I looked out at that audience and I thought about who to thank and I thought about impact and contribution and I chose to measure those things in a way that left you out. I didn't interrupt. I'm not going to pretend I didn't know what I was doing on some level, he continued. Craig had actually helped me draft the speech. Not the whole thing, but the acknowledgement section. And I read his version, and I made small changes, and I told myself it was fine. I told myself you'd understand that this was a professional context. But the truth is I was aware that if I stood up there and thanked Craig extensively and didn't mention you, you'd feel it. And I chose to do it anyway, because I wanted Craig to feel seen. And somewhere along the way I had started to believe that your feelings mattered less. I sat with that. It was an honest thing to say, and it cost him something to say it, and I respected that. Where does that belief come from? I asked. Not to interrogate him, genuinely curious. He thought about it. Craig has a way of not exactly saying things outright, but creating an atmosphere, an understanding that the people who write checks and make introductions are the ones who really move the needle. That emotion and history are nice, but they're not the engine. I absorbed that. I started to believe it. And once I believed it, everything that came from you started to look small because you're not operating in that world. You're a retired firefighter in Dayton with a savings account and a truck, and Craig is Craig. I let the framing do the math for me. He paused. I think that's the most honest I've been about it out loud. I appreciate that, I said. It's the most honest we've talked in a while. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Yeah, the silence that followed was different from the ones during our bad months. More like a shared breath than an absence of things to say. Dad, I'm not calling because I need money, or a place to stay, or anything practical. I know how that looks given the context. I'm calling because I've been working at a coffee shop near my apartment 3 mornings a week to cover some expenses, and last week a guy came in with his kid. Couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, and he ordered his coffee, and the kid asked for a hot chocolate, and the guy counted out the bills from his wallet, and I thought about you, and the peanut butter sandwiches. You told me about those once. Years ago. I hadn't thought about it in a long time. I remembered telling him. He'd been asking about something financial, why we didn't take more vacations or something, and I'd explained that every extra dollar went somewhere specific, and the peanut butter sandwiches were part of the math. I pulled out my wallet that night and counted what was in it, he continued, and I didn't have enough to cover my groceries for the week. I've got a graduate-level education and a company on my resume, and a famous uncle, and I'm counting $11 and some change in a wallet in San Francisco, and I just thought all those years of what you were doing were real. That was real. And I called Craig the way I'd have called you when I needed something, and it went to voicemail, and it's been 3 weeks. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard in a long time. The underneath thing. The layer below the composed, professional register he'd been living in for 5 years. Son, I said. Yeah. You can come home. I know, he said quietly. I don't want to do that to you. You're not doing anything to me. You're my son. Come home if you want to. Dayton's not San Francisco, but the rent is manageable and I make a decent spaghetti. He laughed. An actual laugh, surprised out of him. You still make it with the Italian sausage? Still make it with the Italian sausage. He was quiet for a moment. I might take you up on that. Not forever. Just to reset. For however long you need, I said. He moved back in December. I helped him load the essentials into a U-Haul he drove from San Francisco to Dayton over 3 days, calling me from rest stops along the way, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Kansas, his voice getting slightly less tense with each call as the miles accumulated and the city got further behind him. He'd given up the apartment lease, sold the furniture he could, put the rest in a storage unit. He slept in his old bedroom the first night, same room where I'd told him his mother was gone. The baseball trophies were still on the shelf. I hadn't moved them either. He found work within 2 weeks, a mid-sized tech firm in Columbus doing exactly the kind of software development he'd been building for 5 years, only now as a senior contributor rather than a CEO. The salary was honest and the hours were reasonable. He drove to Columbus on Monday mornings and stayed with a college friend through the week and came back to Dayton on Friday evenings. We had dinner on Saturday nights. Simple meals, nothing fancy. The Italian sausage spaghetti, a pot roast, occasionally breakfast for dinner, which had always been Carol's Sunday treat. We talked during those dinners in a way we hadn't in years. He told me about the Columbus job, his colleagues, small frustrations, small victories. I told him about retirement, the neighborhood, the old guys from Station 12. I still met for coffee on Wednesday mornings, what I was reading, ordinary things. The kind of conversation that doesn't look like anything from the outside but is actually what connection is made of. Craig reached out in January, a text to Tyler that said simply, "Hope you landed well. Worth a conversation when you're ready." Tyler showed it to me across the dinner table and didn't seem to know what expression he was supposed to have about it. "What do you think I should do with that?" he asked. "What do you want to do?" He thought about it. "Nothing yet," he said. "Maybe eventually. But not because I need something from him, on my own terms and in my own time." I thought that was the right answer. I didn't say so. He'd stopped needing me to validate his reasoning, which was its own kind of progress. One evening in February, we were sitting in the living room after dinner, the television off, and Tyler was looking at something on his phone. He put it down and looked up at me. "Dad, I want to say something and I don't want you to brush it off." "Okay. I know the money's gone. I know you gave it to the scholarship, and I know you didn't do it purely as a lesson to me, that it genuinely was the right use of it in your mind, and it genuinely was what Mom would have wanted. I know all of that is true, but I also know it happened because of what I did, because of the speech and the years before it, and I need you to know that I understand what those 18 years represented. What the $400 a month represented. I'm not just saying I'm sorry. I'm saying I understand now what I didn't understand before, which is that the most consistent thing in my life from the day I was born was you. Not Craig, not Flowpath, not any version of success I was trying to build or any definition of opportunity I was chasing. You. And I threw that away for about 5 years trying to become something that I thought was more valuable. I looked at my son, 27 years old, sitting in the living room where he'd grown up, debt to pay down and a long road still ahead. And I thought about Carol saying we start saving tomorrow, not next month. "Tyler," I said, "you didn't throw anything away." I'm sitting here talking to you, aren't I? He nodded. The runway your mother and I wanted to build for you, it doesn't look exactly like we imagined. I'll be honest about that, but a runway is just a starting point. What matters is what you do once you're in the air, and you've still got most of the air in front of you. He nodded again, and this time he didn't look away. In March, the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation sent me a letter. The second Carol Ann Mercer Memorial Scholarship had been awarded. A young man from rural Pennsylvania who'd lost his father on a structure fire 6 years ago, heading to Penn State in the fall for civil engineering, first in his family to attend a 4-year university. There was a photo included in the packet of the young man at his high school holding the award letter, his mother standing next to him with her arm around his shoulders, and an expression I recognized. Tyler read the letter when he came home that Friday. He sat at the kitchen table with it for a while. "Is this going to be annual?" he asked. "As long as the endowment earns enough to fund it," I said. "They told me it should sustain for at least 15 to 20 years with the current balance." He set the letter down carefully. "Dad?" He paused. "I know I don't deserve to say this after everything, but I think you made the right call. With the money. With all of it." I poured us both a cup of coffee and sat across from him at the table with the yellow curtains behind me in the late afternoon light. "Your mother would agree with you," I said. We sat there and drank our coffee and didn't need to say anything else. Some gifts take a long time to recognize. Some roads curve so far from where you started that you can barely see the beginning from where you are. But if someone was laying that road down behind you the whole time, brick by brick, year by year, without asking for acknowledgement, and without stopping, that's not a small thing. That's not background noise. That's the thing. It just sometimes takes standing in the wreckage of someone else's promises to finally see it clearly. If this story stayed with you, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to Arcane Vengeance, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever sacrificed for someone who didn't see it until it was almost too late? I'd love to hear from you. And click the video on your screen to watch the next one. Thank you for being here.